Those clips were from the movie The Last Samurai, which is of questionable historical value. And it's basically a remake of Dances with Wolves, the samurai as the Indians. Please get the shades in back. But there is truth in it. Except what you saw in those clips was not what the army was capable of. The Imperial Army leadership that was fighting this last group of holdout bitter-ender samurai chose to give them enough honor to fight them close. Modern weapons don't need to be close. In the end, they held off and poured in the fire, and the samurai were slaughtered. And that was a good thing for Japan in the eyes of most Japanese. The culture serves the overriding purpose to make Japan strong so that the reign of the God Emperor and so that the rule over the land of the awake gods is preserved. By the 1890s, the Japanese, under the Meiji Restoration, were ready to stretch out their hands to Korea, to Manchuria, north of Korea. And the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 is begun with Japanese sneak attacks. In the 1894 Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese proved that it's not Caucasian versus Oriental that matters. It is technology and a willingness to adopt modern, that is, Western, weapons and ways of war and culture and civilization. The Chinese are as outclassed by the Japanese as they were by the French and the British and others before. And soon Japan has its own concessions, and Japanese soldiers are marching beside the Europeans in establishing unequal treaties inside China. Japan is stretching out its hand. It takes part in the Boxer Rebellion suppression. 10 years after the Sino-Japanese War, the Russians are completing their Trans-Siberian Railroad. The Trans-Siberian Railroad in Japan is perceived as a threat to the Japanese rule in Korea and to Japanese aspirations more broadly in East Asia and China. With the Trans-Siberian, the Russians will be able to use their industrial strength and project it landward across Asia to the east in direct opposition to the Japanese. So, just as the Trans-Siberian Railroad is finished, the Japanese launch a sneak attack on the Russian Navy base at Port Arthur in the Liaoning Peninsula of Manchuria, northeastern China. You see a pattern? Sneak attack 1894, sneak attack 1904. And in the 1904-05 Russo-Japanese War, the Japanese are making a very, very pointed message. Japan is not only superior to China, Japan is superior to the weaker of the European powers. This is the first time that an Asiatic power is meeting a European power in the modern age and wins. The Japanese slowly take Port Arthur, and they destroy the Russian Pacific Squadron. Russia has 3 fleets. In the Pacific, off Vladivostok, in the Baltic Sea, off the Crimea, and in the Black Sea, off of Crimea, south of Russia, and in the Baltic Sea near St. Petersburg, northwest of Russia. Well, the Russians decide that the destruction of the Pacific Squadron will not stand. So they convert their Baltic fleet into the 2nd Pacific Squadron. They then start to sail it around the world, around Africa and south of India, to replace the old Pacific Squadron that had been defeated by Japan and to show the Japanese who was boss. There are some problems, though. First off, the Japanese and the British have an alliance as of 1901. So the British are not going to be friendly to a Russian fleet that is opposing their ally in the Pacific, the Japanese. Number 2, in the North Sea, the Russian Pacific Squadron, 2nd Pacific Squadron, mistakes a few British fishing boats for Japanese torpedo boats in the North Sea, east of Britain. And so they sink them. When this news comes out, the British close all of their ports to the Russians. The Russians have to scrimp. They go to German ports and get coal. They have to fill their ships with coal because they can't coal efficiently because the British deny them this, because the British are allies with the Japanese, and because the Russians were stupid enough to sink a bunch of British fishing vessels as the first act of the Second Pacific Squadron. Finally, the Russian squadron is approaching the Tsushima Strait, which is also known as the Korea Strait, the narrow body of water between Korea and Kyushu, southernmost island of the Japanese home island. In the center of this strait are the islands of Tsushima, nearest landmass. It's a foggy day, so visibility is short, but the Japanese battle fleet is at sea, waiting. The Japanese battle fleet is painted gray to blend in with the mist. The Russian battle fleet is black and yellow and white. The Japanese battle fleet is composed of a series of British-built vessels that are in conformity with one another, that are basically designed to operate as a unit. The Russians have a hodgepodge of French-built and even one American-built vessel that are of different classes, different speeds, different gun calibers, that were never designed to function as part of a single unit. At the Battle of Tsushima, Admiral Haihachiro Togo spanks and destroys the Russians. His famous message to his fleet echoes Nelson's message at Trafalgar with a Japanese twist. He says to his sailors, the fate of the empire depends upon your actions this day. And the Japanese destroy the Russian Pacific Squadron. They capture some of it. They sink the rest of it. One light cruiser or heavy destroyer of the Russians arrives in Vladivostok. The rest are destroyed. At this point, American President Theodore Roosevelt steps in, invites Japanese and Russian representatives to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, actually to Kittery, Maine, but it's called the Treaty of Portsmouth. And for a few months, Roosevelt basically encourages the Japanese to be restrained and the Russians to recognize that they've lost the war, which they have. In fact, the Russians are so badly spanked on land and at sea that there's almost a revolution against the Tsar. We'll talk about this next unit. So the Japanese get most of what they want in East Asia. The Russians have been spanked, and Japan has not only taken its place among the European powers, it's taken its place near the middle, and they have ambitions to rise up further. So what this tells you is something about reality. As a human being, you are going to face moments where something that you cherish is proved false. It's happened to me, it will happen to you. At that moment, you will meet yourself, because at that moment, you will make a definitive choice. If you are courageous, you will accept reality. You will be honest with yourself, and you will begin reevaluating what you think, with all of the uncomfortableness that that entails. You may not be wrong about everything, but you were wrong about this one thing. It happens. We're fallible. We're not perfect. That which we want to believe is not always true. It's not always right. What we believe is provisional opinion. We do our best. But there are many, many, many people that would literally rather chew their own fingers off than recognize their own errors. There are people who would rather be destroyed than admit a mistake, especially if that mistake is a deeply cherished conviction. With the result being, what happens to a lot of people is they stagnate. and they become more and more detached from reality and therefore less and less capable of mastering it. If you're not careful, this will happen to you. And it's worse where there's groupthink. If you're in a place that has groupthink, like many colleges today, it will be so easy to join in with all of that, especially if you are sympathetic to the ideas. But there are moments where every ideology, every belief system is revealed to be finite. There are moments where every ideology, every belief system has its limits. It's mistaken beyond a certain point. It's valid here, but not over here. If you're in a world of groupthink, there's going to be no encouragement to admit reality. And if you're a normal human being, there's going to be every personal reason of vanity and of self-servingness to avoid reality. The Chinese avoid reality, an entire civilization, one of the world's great civilizations. From the 1840s through, at the very least, the 1920s, refuse to deal with the fact that they have been eclipsed in every meaningful way by the West. And this eclipse causes them to become a victim. The Japanese take the opposite course. Not necessarily because they're any smarter than the Chinese, or the British, or the Germans for that matter, had it happened the other way around, but because the Japanese are desperate to avoid weakness that could harm the imperial rule. And as a people, they are dedicated to that goal in a way that few nations are dedicated to any unified principle. So there is a lesson of history here. If starships arrive on the Earth, or near Earth orbit, and those starships are occupied by aliens who have clearly mastered not only space travel, but interstellar travel, they will inevitably be far in advance of us. And if we have any choice at all, which we may not, this is why I think we need to go out into space and meet them in space with our own abilities. If we don't, we're asking to be conquered, eaten, absorbed, or whatever. But let's say that they meet us and we have choices. Some of us will go inward and insist that everything that's alien is suspect. We will deny it, we will resist it, and they will follow. Those people who do that will follow the route of China in the late 1800s. Others of us will embrace alien ways and try to learn them as quickly as we can, but on our own terms. The Japanese never give up their soul. They give up the superficialities of Japaneseness. Those poor samurai who die on Shiroyama, the mountain, in that battle, can't give up and can't distinguish between the heart of Japan and the periphery of Japan. The heart of Japanese culture is Shinto. And to serve the emperor and to be worthy of living in the land of awakened gods, the Japanese must be strong. And that insistence causes them to give up their clothing, to give up their government, to give up all sorts of superficial things in order to preserve their strength. There's a lesson there. Think about it. Now, the third great place in Asia that we're going to talk about is the Indian subcontinent, which we will talk about next time. Let's see, we got some time. I want to start this now. Yeah, I do. Okay. The Indian subcontinent ain't called a subcontinent for nothing. It is a massive region of the world, south of the Himalayas, east of Persia, and west of Indochina. You have the lands that are now called Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, the Andaman Islands, and Burma, or Myanmar. And all of these areas are part of British India. They become part of British India. How? Well, you may remember from last unit. Clive, the general of the East India Company, has some people in the Black Hole of Calcutta, and his forces at Plassey crushed the local Raja, the local king, and set the tone for the British to take over India, which they do in the late 17 and early 1800s. But the British that take over India are not the British government. They are the British East India Company, a for-profit venture. A lot like the companies that helped establish colonies in British North America, which became the United States. But in India, the East India Company is very good at divide and rule. China, overall, has a unitary ethnicity, the Han, and a unitary culture, the Imperial or Mandarin culture. Subcultures within the Chinese region have been suppressed for about over 2,000 years. They're now extending this cultural suppression to the Uyghurs of Xinjiang, to the Tibetans, and they're going to try it with the Taiwanese if we allow it. The Chinese are going to try to have Han, and in this case communist culture, dominate everything. And that unity is a factor in Chinese life. I've already spent time talking to you about Japanese unity. But in the Indian subcontinent, there are a variety of divisions which cannot be easily bridged. The biggest is religious. The largest group in central and southern India is the Hindu religion, a polytheistic religion that has at its heart the notion of reincarnation, that the soul migrates between life and life, that you go up or down the cosmic chain of being by your choices, and therefore, if you are a good person, you will go from being an untouchable to a middle-class person, to being a Kshatriya or a warrior, to being a Brahmin or a priest, and then if you're really good, you might become a cow. Because cows are superior to humans in all ways, as far as the Hindus are concerned. They destroy nothing, they eat grass, they produce milk. What a creature, taking something so meaningless and bringing such bounty to the world. This is why cows are sacred, and why you will not be able to get a hamburger if you ever go to India. The other great religion of India is Islam. And basically, we have talked about, at least you should have in medieval history, we've talked about Islam. Islam doesn't play well with others. Islam is willing to allow others to live as second-class citizens or kuffar within their societies, but they are not willing to accept anything like religious parity or religious tolerance. Yes?
I went to Indonesia, and the cows, there was like a whole little village that was just like all the cows.
Interesting.
And they had like little houses, like just little like huts
Cool.
for all the cows.
Well, those people were showing the cows proper respect.
Yeah, and they were like, they had all their little like food, and they had like caretakers that just like walked them around.
I didn't know that, and I didn't realize that there was such a large Hindu population in Indonesia, but it makes total sense.
It's really cool.
It does. If you have any website that shows that place, email it to me, because I'd love to learn more about it. That's cool. Anyway, Muslims and Hindus. To Hindus, cows are sacred. To Muslims, pigs are profane. They don't get along. And in India, there's also a variant of Islam called the Sikh religion. If you know of Baha'i, you know of one of Islam's offshoots. Baha'i tends to be peaceful and meditative. The Sikhs are a warrior people. Every man takes an oath not to cut his hair. So Sikh men have these amazing beards and long hair, and they wear turbans. And all men take on the surname Singh, S-I-N-G-H, which means lion. So what the British East India Company is going to do is divide and rule. between the religious differences, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, and also between the linguistic distances. You got Hindi speakers, Bengali speakers, you got different ethnicities, Dravidians in the south, Caucasians in the north. You've got divisions, divisions, divisions. And the thing about India is it's a multicultural paradise in the sense that you have people of all types living in all communities. And the British exploit all of these differences to divide and rule. And that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you. When you were in Indonesia, what island were you on?
We went to Bali.
Nice.
And then we also went to Singapore.
Well, that's different.
Yeah, that was a different one.
Have a good day, folks.
I have a picture. I have a picture. Also in a little like hut, and they're being fans. Fans? Yeah. I want to screenshot this. Yeah, after the hotel we were staying at, well, it was like an Airbnb thing. They had like a bunch of different houses that had like little cow families. Really cute.
I'm gonna stop the video, don't I?
Yeah, it was really. I'll find the picture.